this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains Rogerian psychotherapy and how to self-actualize.
The person has to be wanting to change, in principle, in a positive direction. They have to be willing to tell the truth. Then the next element of Rogerian psychotherapy is something that he called unconditional positive regard. And unconditional positive regard in the Rogerian tradition is something like radical acceptance. It's actually a hallmark of modern child-rearing techniques. You should wholeheartedly accept all aspects of the person's being. Now, Rogers believed that, or posited that, partly because he also believed in, what was it called? Conditions of worth. Here's a condition of worth. I don't like you when you act like that. So you imagine you might tell a child that. I don't like you when you act like that. And maybe you tell them that about a bunch of things that they do. But maybe those are integral parts of the child's being. And by making your lack of acceptance known, you make it impossible for the child to incorporate those aspects of his organismal experience, into his self-concept. You can see echoes of the superego ego idea there. And so Rogers would say, well, if someone comes into psychotherapy and experiences unconditional positive regard, that means that they'll be able to reveal those elements of their organismic experience that have been rejected, say, by the social world and themselves, experience them, and then potentially incorporate them within the self-concept, and that that's going to be a good thing. Because Rogers is a great believer in the natural inevitability of positive transformation if you set that up as your goal. He also believes that that should be your goal, and that it's actually your natural goal if, for example, you haven't been subjected to arbitrary conditions of worth. Now, I'm going to read you something that Rogers wrote, which is quite interesting. And I think I found it extremely effective. There is one other important assumption in the idea of self-actualization. The other thing that Rogers tried to ensure that his clients developed was autonomy and independence. Now, for Rogers, there was very little difference between the move towards autonomy and personal independence and the process of self-actualization. Now, given that we're looking back at Rogers' work 50 years later, you might ask yourself if autonomy and independence is a necessary precondition for psychological health. Because you could make the case that productive interdependence and more communal orientation is equally healthy. But that's not a Rogerian presupposition. So, his ideal is the fully functioning individual. So here's his hypothesis with regards to psychotherapy. Assuming a minimal mutual willingness to be in contact and to receive communications, we may say that the greater the communicated congruence of experience, awareness, and behavior on the part of one individual, the more the ensuing relationship will involve a tendency towards reciprocal communication with the same qualities. mutually accurate understanding of the communications, improved psychological adjustment and functioning in both parties, and mutual satisfaction in the relationship. Okay, so let's unpack that. Assuming a minimal mutual willingness to be in contact and to receive communication. Well, the first thing you might say is that's pretty much the hallmark of a relationship, right? Because if you're not in contact, well, clearly you don't have a relationship. And if you are in contact but you're not communicating, you probably don't have a relationship either. So, and that also begs the question of exactly what a relationship is for. And that's something that's very much worth considering, because people don't really usually know what a relationship is for. They certainly know that, as a general rule, they're going to pursue them, but they don't really have any idea, in some sense, what the optimal state is or what the desired final state should be. Now, of course, the desired final state 50 years ago was marriage, but it's certainly the case now that most people who are couples aren't married. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what's the utility of a relationship and what's the utility of a long-term relationship? Well, a Rogerian answer to that would be, the more based on trust the relationship is, the more likely that you're going to be in contact and to receive communications. And then as a consequence of that, you're going to become better and better at representing your organismal experience within your self-concept, and that's going to facilitate your movement towards self-awareness and self-actualization. It's a two brains are better than one idea. So we say, well, we establish a relationship. Okay, and the goal of our relationship is to make things better. And we make a presupposition that the way you make things better is by telling the truth as you see it. So remember, this is a phenomenological theory, and so the truth that Rogers is talking about isn't objective truth, and I suspect that's at least in part because establishing objective truth within the confines of a relationship is, I think it's technically impossible. And we talked about that before, because each interaction between the members of a couple or people in any relationship is contaminated in a sense by all of the other interactions they've ever had, plus everything they bring to bear on the situation. And there's just no untangling that objectively. What did you mean when you said that? Well, God, you can argue about that to the point of divorce and for 10 years afterwards, without ever coming to a satisfactory conclusion. All right. The greater the communicated congruence of experience, awareness, and behavior on the part of one individual, the more the ensuing relationship will involve a tendency towards reciprocal communication with the same qualities. Okay, so here's the idea. You go see a psychotherapist, a Rogerian psychotherapist, and at least in principle, this is someone who's mastered or is attempting to master these basic modes of being. So what they're going to do is they'll tell you, I'm going to tell you the truth as I see it. And so the way I see that happening in psychotherapy is that when someone comes to see me, I listen to them. And that means that I'm not distracted by anything else. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next. I'm not thinking about the things I have to do today. I'm not thinking about the last time I saw this person. I'm not allowing my attention to wander away from the person. And then I'm watching them and listening to them at the same time. And those are the same things, because to really listen to someone, you also have to watch them, because then you subceive, perhaps, or perceive all the nonverbal elements of communication that go along, well, partly with voice tone, but partly with eye direction, and partly with very subtle transformations of facial gestures. So sometimes, for example, I see on my clients that they'll all of a sudden turn into a child. It's very interesting. It's like they'll be recounting some experience. It's like fixation from a Freudian perspective. They'll be describing some experience from the distant past, and for a second their expression will approximate who they were when they were 6 years old. It's really something remarkable to see. And you can see these things if you really pay attention. And then, as they talk, I'm watching what's happening inside me as I listen to their words. And all sorts of things will happen. Sometimes I'll get an image, or sometimes I'll get a memory of something we talked about before, or sometimes I'll notice that what they're saying right now is different than something they said 5 minutes ago, and so then I'll say, wait a sec, I'm trying to understand what you're telling me, and I noticed that you just said this, and it seems to imply this, but then, a couple of minutes ago when we were talking about that, then you said this, and I don't see how those two things are the same. And I'm not doing that because I want them to rectify the paradox. I'm doing that because I want to understand what they are saying. And if someone says A to you and then they say B, you don't know what they're saying. And so the question is for clarification. There's no other direction than that. And then maybe, I'll have a little image, like the sort of a fragment of a dream, and I'll say, wait a second, what you just said, when you said what you just said, this is what I experienced. And then maybe we'll talk for a while about what that might mean.